this is the farmhouse of John and Amy Harper. It was built around 1855 or so. John and Amy were local farmers, so we would kind of consider them upper middle class today. They're comfortable, but they're not extremely wealthy. They own about 800 acres of land, which sounds like a lot now, but compared to some of their neighbors, wasn't so much. You know, many of these guys have over 1,000 or so. They own about 800 acres of land, and most of that land is filled with longleaf pine trees. And so they actually lease that out to people to harvest the rosin from inside the tree and distill that down into turpentine. So they called it turpentine orchards. And that's really where the Harpers made most of their money. Like I said, they're about upper middle class. They did enslave 3 people here on the property in 1860, as Alex, Lucy, and Clarcy. And they would have lived in a structure kind of like this one out here. We're not going to go to that as part of the tour today, but it's open so you can check that out, or if you might have already checked it out. So the house, like I said, was built around 1855. John and Amy have been living here for about 10 years with their children when General Sherman's army marched down this road right out here. So it's the same road that's there now. Today it's Harper House Road and it's paved. Obviously it wasn't paved in 1865. But the left wing of General Sherman's army was marching toward Goldsboro. The right wing's about 20 miles, also marching toward Goldsboro. They're kind of marching in tandem because there's 30,000 in each. If you put all those 60,000 people together, it takes forever to get anywhere. So he splits them up in 2, and they're heading to Goldsboro where they can be resupplied and touch up with rail lines heading back toward the coast. However, about 2 miles that way, the left wing of Sherman's army stumbles into a 20,000 man Confederate army under General Johnston. They had no idea it was here. They didn't know it was even in the area. And so there's the Battle of Bentonville, just kind of breaks out in pretty quick succession there. All about 2 miles from here, closer toward the village of Bentonville. And so the fighting is all going to stay kind of relatively in that area. The closest it's going to get to here is about a half a mile away on the Morris Farm. And there on the Morris Farm is actually where the 14th Corps of that left wing, about half of that left wing sets up their first hospital. And they're going to be located up there on the Morris Farm. They start doing a few surgeries there at the Morris Farmhouse, and bullets start coming through the walls. Not a very good hospital if your surgeons are also about to get shot. So they actually have to pick up all their gear and run as quickly as they can to try to evade the battle and get back here to the Harper House, which is a place of relative safety where they can commence doing the surgeries and taking care of the wounded soldiers. So the Harper House stays as the field hospital for the 14th Corps for the rest of the battle, so 3 days. Once the battle is over, they move on, and we'll get into that later. I think we might have some more people joining us here. So we'll just wait. The H is hospital. Yeah. So the yellow flag with the green H was the Union Army signal for a hospital. So they're technically non-combatants, so they're off limits, kind of. Obviously, as we saw in the Morris Farmhouse, that's not always the case.
So what do the Confederates do?
The Confederates?
Yeah.
So they have their own system of field hospitals, and they're going to be behind the Confederate lines on the other side of the battlefield.
Okay.
Specifically in the village of Bentonville. Most of the houses and structures and stuff there were used as Confederate field hospitals.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, sorry, we're
Y'all joining?
just a little late. Yeah.
All right, you're good. Just come on up.
Okay.
So I was just telling them this house was built in 1855 by John and Amy Harper. They were kind of upper middle class, pretty comfortable farmers here in the area. They actually made most of their money from harvesting turpentine from longleaf pine trees. And the house is not the first hospital here. The 14th Corps actually used the Morris Farmhouse, which is about a half a mile up the road, as the hospital. But bullets were coming through the walls, so they had to retreat back. And that's how they settled here at the Harper House. And this is common practice on both sides. Union and Confederate Army would take over any houses, barns, structures, anything they felt like they needed to be able to treat wounded soldiers. They would just commandeer that. That was common practice. The Harpers, 2 of their children are fighting in the Confederate Army. So did they really want a whole bunch of Union soldiers in their house? Probably not. But, they didn't really have an option in the matter. John Harper's son, JJ, he actually has his own house in the village of Bentonville, and his house is taken as a Confederate hospital. And, so everybody kind of saw it and was right in the middle of it. You can imagine it's a pretty harrowing experience. This is the original house. It is sitting on its original brick foundation. The structure of the house is mostly original. So the floorboards, the mantels, the doors, the doorways, all that stuff is original. The furniture inside is historic and period, but it's not original to the Harpers. They don't have any original furniture pieces. All right. So we are going to step into a couple of these rooms here. Walk into here first. So as we walk in, look around, you notice there's 4 rooms downstairs and then 4 more rooms upstairs. Everything is kind of perfectly symmetrical going off of this main hallway here. And that was pretty common practice in the 1850s. It's kind of like a vernacular Greek revival style is what was popular. Same thing with like the faux marble on the fireplace there, and also the faux wood here. So this is obviously it's actual wood. It's just painted to look like a higher grain of wood, a better grain of wood. This was common back then. This would have been the Harper's parlor, and part of that is because of the way that marble is painted on there. When it was taken over as a field hospital, these front 2 rooms would have served as operating rooms, mainly because they have the most light. And spider web right there, but. They're going to have the most light so the surgeons can see. They're not just going to be able to turn on a big lamp or anything to be able to see. So they're going to try to prioritize light and access to water, which the Harpers had a well that they would have been using. Here at the Harper House, they treated just about 600 soldiers, about 550 Union soldiers, and about 50 Confederates. So that yellow flag up there we were talking about with the green H, that signifies hospital, which means anybody, whoever you are, if you're injured, you can come here and you can get help. The same policy goes on the battlefield. If someone's injured, it doesn't matter what color they're wearing, they're going to pick them up and they're going to try to treat them. Technically, the Confederates that were treated here were prisoners of war, but they're pardoned and allowed to go home and take care of themselves once the battle's over. Again, that's pretty common practice on both sides. So whenever they would be bringing these hundreds of soldiers down here to the hospital, obviously there's not room in this small room to take care of all of them at one time. So essentially the wagons would come up and drop them off in the front yard where they would have to perform what essentially we today call triage. And that idea of prioritizing certain patients over others to make sure that as many people as possible can save their lives, that was invented during the Civil War. And so they have a pretty unique system here where they categorize soldiers by severity of condition. So they're going to treat the most severe but survivable cases first, the people that need intervention immediately. And if they get that intervention, they're pretty likely to survive. For the most part, those are going to be amputations. So they're going to bring them in here and immediately go ahead and do a full amputation. The main reason they needed to do those amputations because they're using these lead mini balls. This is how they're getting shot. Other types of shrapnel and stuff, all of these things, there's lead, they're heavy, they're just going to completely shatter the bone. So you can see like that's what it does when one of these bullets hits something. It's just, it'll mangle and tear up and do a lot of damage. And so if you get shot in the arm or the leg, it's most likely that's going to just shatter your bone completely. So there's not much saving it. And for these guys here, they want to do as quickly and efficiently as possible, save someone's life. And so if it's save your arm or save your life, they're going to go for save your life. And that's what they're going to do here is just chop the arm right off, throw it right out the window right there, and take the soldiers to the backyard for recovery. They do have a pretty complicated process for amputation. Like it is an actual surgery. They're not just hacking away. You can see all these tools here are going to be used for amputation. So it's actually a process involved with amputation. It's not just hacking away. Also, luckily for the soldiers, they do have chloroform. They are knocking the soldiers unconscious. That is in 95% of all Civil War surgeries use some form of anesthesia. Usually either chloroform or ether. Here's going to be chloroform pretty exclusively. They can do a full amputation in about 10 to 15 minutes. So even though it's a process, these guys are pros at it. They've been doing it thousands and thousands of times over and over and over the past 3 to 4 years they've been in the Army. So they know how to do these amputations really well. They, like I said, they bring a guy in, knock him unconscious, throw the arm or leg right out the window, and then take him to the backyard for recovery. They do have some painkillers. They have powdered morphine they use when they get here. They would just sprinkle powdered morphine right into the wound. And then afterward, they have different opiate products, more morphine, also opium pills and stuff like that. So they are using that. For amputations, they do have about a 60 to 80% chance of survival. And I can pass this chart around too if you'd like to see that. Essentially, the further away from the heart the wound is, the more likely they are to survive. So like fingers and toes amputations have over a 90% survival rate. They're pretty likely to make it. Compared to like a hip joint or shoulder amputation, stuff like that, they're a little bit more higher mortality rate there. Anybody have any questions in here?
What do they do to prevent infection?
Nothing. They know what infection is, but they don't really know what causes it yet.
Yeah.
So there are people at the time in the Civil War that are figuring out what germs are, but the guys here have no idea what germs are. So they're not cleaning, they're not washing their hands, they're not sanitizing anything. Even the tools, they're just going to wipe it off on their apron and move on to the next guy. Yeah. So for all the advancements in medical technology, for all the great surgery stuff they're doing, the anesthesia, being able to use triage, all that great medical technology that's happening in the Civil War, is all kind of taken aback by the amount of infections that are happening. Yeah, it's a really good question. Any other questions?
Are these books original?
Those books are historic, but they're not original. No.
I mean, they look really old.
Yeah, they are very old. I couldn't actually tell you where most of those came from, but they're just kind of part of the collection here. Go into that room. Take a look. So I was talking about recovery. Most of the soldiers were brought to the backyard for recovery. Like I said, there's about 600 guys here being treated and taking care of recovery. So that's going to add up pretty quickly. So they're kind of put anybody anywhere they can find place for them. And some of the Harper's smokehouses or outbuildings, under a tree, anywhere they can find places for them. Most of these guys don't have many personal items on them. They may have dropped it on the battlefield or something. So there's some guys probably just lying out on the ground with nothing really to them. All that said, officers do get preferential treatment. They get treated a little bit better because you know that they're the big bosses. And the officers, they got to recover in this room back here. So that's why we have the blankets on the floors, and you know they have more personal items. They're in here writing letters, playing cards, doing whatever as they recover. The highest ranking soldier treated here, he's actually a brigadier general, and that's Benjamin Fearing. That's what he looked like. He actually had parts of his hand, and forefinger, and thumb amputated. So again, pretty likely to survive there. He had also been wounded at Chickamauga 2 years earlier, straight through both thighs, and did not have either amputation that time. So, pretty interesting. And that would have been the Harper's, their sitting room, kind of like their informal living room. They would just kind of hang out day to day. Whereas the parlor would be the more formal living room.
The door that goes in there, I don't know if it's in the bedroom or. Or maybe not, I'm sure. I don't know.
So the family all was upstairs
It's the
during all
same,
this?
yeah.
So this room is the Harper's dining room. And that's the reason why they have this door here is because it would go outside and over to the kitchen. Harper's would have had a separated kitchen from the house. It wouldn't have been part of the house. Mainly because in the summers it just gets so hot in the kitchen, it would heat the whole house. And that's just basically almost unbearable. These summers get really hot out here. Trust me, I know. So we can see the dining room table here is being used as a surgery table. They're taking the doors off the hinges like they did in the other room. Both of these rooms probably would have had 2 or 3 surgery tables in them, but we just don't have the room to have y'all in here too. This room, whereas that room's the amputations of those first priority, top priority cases, this room's going to be kind of the catch-all room for everyone else. They're kind of sending those in there. Everybody else in here, so if we think of those are the top priority, the second priority wounds, those are minor wounds. These are easily survivable and they don't need immediate treatment. So that's if a bone isn't shattered. Sometimes those bullets didn't shatter a bone and they would just enter the body somewhere and it wouldn't shatter a bone. Maybe it would break a bone, cuts and burns, abrasions, all that kind of stuff. Those are going to be treated probably outside. They won't even come inside. They're not even going to bother with that. They're going to send an assistant surgeon or somebody out there to wrap up a wound or pull out a bullet, extract a bullet, or even like set a bone, stuff like that. It's pretty simple. They're not going to spend too much time on that. The third category and the final category, these are likely fatal wounds. These are wounds that they're going to try to treat, they're going to try to save everybody, but these are ones they know that it's just the statistics aren't in their favor. So that's mostly the head, the chest, and the abdomen. Anywhere in that area, there's not really a whole lot they can do. They're not going to amputate your head. So they're going to try their best to remove the bullet, remove any other outside shrapnel, any stuff like that, and wrap up the wound and keep it nice and clean. Again, they don't know anything about germs, so by clean is very different from our perspective now, of course. There's all kinds of dirty, gross details I can get into, but I won't for y'all's safety. These are just kind of what these tools here are for. The bullet extraction tools. We have a bullet probe. And so this is where they would try to use these to try to find the bullets. This little ceramic thing here would tap up against the lead. They didn't really like using those. They preferred their fingers. Again, dirty, nasty environment. And they could do other surgeries, like what over here is actually a trepanation kit, and that's used for skull surgery. That's not very common in the field, but they could have had it and they could have been doing some of them, just because the types of injuries they're seeing are so brutal. The main reason we believe that those types of surgeries are being treated here is because of what's on the floor right here. And this is our only surviving blood stain. They actually did a chemical analysis of all the stains in the house in 2005 or 6, I believe. And this one was brought back as human blood. And so if you imagine a man on his back with his head toward the window, shoulders here, just kind of bleeding out through his shirt. So probably some type of chest or shoulder injury that's causing that. And we don't know if he was laid on the ground after surgery, before treatment, or whatever, but somebody ended up there pretty much bleeding out on the floor. So you can imagine this is Amy's dining room, John and Amy's dining room. They don't really want blood stains on their dining room floor. Somebody's tried to remove these blood stains, and that one's still here 157 years later. So it's pretty remarkable.
So they continued to live here after the
Yes.
war?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so all this stuff would have been gone. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Did they have children?
They did, yeah. They had
traumatized for life.
the Harpers had 9 children lived to adulthood, and they had 6 of them were living here at the time of the battle. So they're all upstairs too, including Caroline, who her husband had died in the war in the Confederate service. She moved back home with her 2 children. So John and Amy also have 2 grandchildren. They're 5 and 2 years old, respectively. So they're pretty young. And they're just up there, just trying to hold
So
out.
upstairs in the bedroom, you can see that there was an additional door. Was that an additional bedroom?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So there's 2 more bedrooms on the back side that you have to go through the front bedroom to get to. We have those closed off now, mainly for artifact storage and stuff. You can step in this back room and we'll finish up.
Sorry.
You're good.
You can tell it's kind of settled.
Yeah.
Some floors are a little uneven. So this room was it's kind of separated from the rest of the house with just that one door. This was John Harper's office, we're pretty sure. It was probably used for all kinds of things throughout the years. Could have been used as a bedroom, maybe whenever they got a little older. But at the time, it was most likely John Harper's office. And so he has another exterior door here, so people can come in and out of the house without having to go through the rest of the house. During the battle, this was used as the steward's office. So the steward is kind of like the hospital administrator or the pharmacist of the army. So you have surgeons and the assistant surgeons. They're the ones doing the surgical work and stuff like that. Stewards are kind of doing everything else. They're putting together all the medications. They know where all that kind of stuff is. They're rolling pills. They're also filling out paperwork, filling out casualty sheets, so we know who is injured, what happened to them, why they didn't report back to the regiment, all that kind of stuff. They also cook the food. They're going to have a giant trench out there with a fire in it cooking food for 600 soldiers that are recovering and need food to be able to recover easier. So they have a really busy job. So this is kind of like their headquarters where they're kind of going in and out. The kitchen's right out here, so they have easy access to everything. So you hear the Pannier kit here. Most of this stuff is going to be used to treat diseases. So it's not really used a whole lot in the battle scenario, more in the camp life stuff. But they do have opium pills, all that kind of stuff. Laudanum, which is a mixture of opium and alcohol, to use for painkillers. Anybody have any other questions?
I think so.
So once the battle was over, the Army moved on to Goldsboro. So the Union Army, they are heading to Goldsboro. In Goldsboro, they get resupplied with stuff that they haven't had since they've been in Georgia. So they are ready to get to Goldsboro, new uniforms, all that stuff. So as soon as the battle's over, they're heading that way, and they're taking their wounded with them. They take their wounded to Goldsboro, put them on a train, and send them to Newbern, where they can rest and have more recovery, real surgeries, all that kind of stuff at a real hospital at Foster General Hospital. There are so many of them. Some of those guys were actually even sent on a boat up to David's Harper in New York, right outside of New York City, where they were finished their convalescing for the rest of the war. The Harpers, they moved back into their house, got their house back. But remember, I had mentioned there were about 50 Confederates treated here too. The Union did not take those Confederates with them; they left them here. So the Harpers got their house back, but they also got about 50 Confederates to take care of. So they stayed here until about June or July of that year. So 3 or 4 months, they were trying to take care of these guys. 30 of them got better and walked home. Like I said, they had been pardoned, and they were probably just ready to go home. So these guys are from Texas, Alabama, Mississippi. They got a long walk, so they head home out. Those other 20 that were here, they were buried right across the road here near the Harper Family Cemetery, and they're still here now. So that's what those Confederate graves are over there. The Union that died here, they were buried behind the house and were later moved to Raleigh National Cemetery, and that's where they still are now. We have a couple pictures here. So this is the oldest known photo of the house. This is from 1895. You see John and Amy on the front porch there. And there's actually a Red Cross flag, and that's because it's 1895 at a 30-year reunion of the battle, and that was what was the current hospital flag, not the historic hospital flag. Once John Harper, he actually died later that year, and 2 years later in 1897, he died, and then Amy died in 1901. The kids had already moved on, had their own houses and stuff, so the kids sold the house, and 2 other families lived here, the Dunn family and the Thornton family, until 1957, when it sold to the state. And so it sold to the state, become a state historic site right about 8 years before the centennial of the battle. You can see the Dunns had added on a kitchen onto the side here, so they had an interior kitchen, made it a 1-story porch and put a tin roof on. But most of the interior of the house they had kept the same, and when the state bought it, it was pretty easy to turn it back to that 1865 look like it has now. And then here's a picture of John and Amy. This was in 1897, so the year that John died. Any other final questions? All right, well, thanks for coming out.